Welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Tom Kelly, your nonprofit catalyst. As the founder of Charity Auctions Today and Donor Books, I've spent almost 2 decades helping organizations like yours break through fundraising barriers, engage communities on a deeper level, and accelerate meaningful growth. In this podcast, along with my incredible guests, we'll uncover transformational ideas, tackle challenges head-on, and share insider strategies that you won't find anywhere else. Each episode is designed to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark and beyond, because impact doesn't scale by chance, it scales by choice. So let's get started. Welcome back to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. Today we're diving into the critical topic of board assessment and how to set your board up for long-term success. Effective governance is the backbone of any thriving nonprofit, and assessing your board's performance is key to unlocking its full potential. To guide us through this conversation, we're excited to welcome Gregory Nielsen, President and CEO of Nielsen Training and Consulting. Gregory is a seasoned nonprofit leader and consultant dedicated to helping organizations and leaders excel. With a wealth of experience, including his time as CEO of the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, Gregory has been instrumental in expanding nonprofit leadership, development, and governance practices. Gregory, welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast.
Tom, it's great to be with you.
Awesome. So today we're talking about the exciting world of nonprofit boards and board assessments, and really kind of the importance of why we need to regularly be assessing our boards and not waiting for that fire to go off, where we then have to make those tough decisions on, monitoring the performance and even maybe making some changes to the board. So leading into that, what is the purpose of having a board assessment, and what is kind of the regular, cadence that a nonprofit should do to kind of assess their board regularly so that they're kind of staying on in front of it and not worrying for that fire alarm to go off before they make any decisions?
Tom, you make a great point at the outset that board assessment is it's one of the habits of healthy boards, is evaluating their own performance, holding a mirror up to themselves to see where are we hitting the mark, where are we effective, what are we struggling with? And that's a tool to allow boards to set priorities for the coming year. So just as you mentioned, we don't want to wait until the fire is burning before we assess it. It's the same thing with nonprofit boards, right? As you know, when our health, we go to our doctor for an annual physical. We rotate the tires, change the oil in our car every 3,000 miles. We change the batteries in the smoke detector before they're beeping at us at 3 a.m. It's things that we do as routine maintenance that helps us understand and pick up on issues before they become crises. And nonprofit board assessments are the same thing.
Now, when it comes to assessing the board, I know you work with a lot of nonprofit boards, and this is kind of what you do, right? This is your wheelhouse of assessing nonprofit boards. But what can a small nonprofit do on their own to, maybe have a checklist? What are some of the quick things or quick wins that they can do to really kind of get ahead of that maybe review or performance review for their board?
Tom, that's such an important question. And a lot of what I do is tailored to small and mid-sized nonprofits. I was a CEO of a small nonprofit for over a decade. So that's always been my sweet spot and where my heart is. But for small nonprofits, it starts with your board expectations. What are those areas that you expect excellence from your board, whether it's financial oversight, whether it's fundraising, whether it's strategic planning? When you've set out those expectations for your board, before you get to a formal board assessment, at the end of each year, you can always go through and say, how have we performed as a board team in each of these areas that we've set expectations for? Is there additional support that the board needs to meet those expectations? What I've found in my career, and I'm sure you've seen the same, is board members want to excel. No one joins a nonprofit board wanting to drag the team down or wanting to not meet expectations. Sometimes having that routine check-in not only allows board members to reflect on their performance, but it also allows them to articulate, this is where I'm struggling. This is where I could use some extra support. I want to be an effective ambassador or fundraiser for the board, but I need a little bit more training, or I need some additional communication skills or talking points that would help me be more effective. That's the value of stepping back and evaluating.
Well, I've talked to a lot of nonprofits over the years, and one of the big things I notice is the founders kind of look at their board like the founder still needs to do everything, and the boards are just there for like an advisory position. When you're working with and seeing some of the most successful nonprofits, how involved is the board? Is the board like involved in the fundraising? Is it involved in different aspects to help the organization grow, or is it mostly just an advisory position?
Our boards are a lot like other small businesses, other corporations, is that they have different stages in their life cycle. When a nonprofit is first founded, there's typically a founder with a strong vision, and that person takes a heavier hand in the management and leadership decisions and the strategic direction. As an organization matures and grows, and this doesn't necessarily mean grows in terms of budget size, just grows in terms of its maturity and impact on the community, the board takes on a much more strategic role. Uh, always carries fiduciary duties. So board members always have to be aware of the fact that even if the founder or even if the CEO is taking a more active role in setting the strategic direction, the board can never be fully hands off. You can never just sit back and allow things to unfold and happen. The board is always responsible for being a thought partner with the founder or CEO, pushing back, challenging appropriately, and having those strategic discussions, because that's where the magic happens for nonprofits. These organizations are addressing homelessness or veterans issues or food insecurity. These are difficult, ingrained, systemic issues. There is no one founder, no one CEO who has all of the answers. The value of having a board of smart, diverse, talented people is they bring those different perspectives to the boardroom and push back and challenge, and that productive conflict leads to better outcomes and impact.
Now, when a nonprofit starts, a lot of them start and their board members are like friends and family. At what stage in their growth should they really be looking at like maybe bringing on more of an expert in a specific area to really kind of excel their nonprofit?
Quickly. The answer is quickly, and there's no magic, 3 months, 6 months, a year. But I understand that a lot of nonprofits form with that friends and family board. And I don't want to discount that, because friends and family might be super smart and talented and bring lots of wisdom and experience. But over time, as the organization starts to mature, you want external perspectives as well. You want people who see the issue from a slightly different vantage point than you do. People who may have lived experience, people who may have completely different experiences than your friends and family have had. That diversity of perspectives, that diversity of thought, um, leads the organization to grow and develop at a more rapid rate than if it just kind of stays insular.
Well, I kind of feel like the beginning of a nonprofit, when it is friends and family, they're all kind of bought into the mission. They're bought into really just serving. They're more like volunteers, and they're kind of like more emotionally making emotional decisions instead of strategic decisions. And I think that's why having that outside perspective is really kind of bringing in that strategic thinker instead of having the emotional thinkers, because a board of directors is, it's nice to have some friends and family on it, but it can't all be emotional thinkers, because I don't think the success rate would last very long.
It's also about different styles, Tom. So just as you mentioned, when we think of the best teams that we've been a part of, in any of us in our lives, in our careers, whether it was sports teams or clubs or work groups that we've been a part of, there have been a diversity of skills and talents on the team. A football team that has 15 quarterbacks and no one to block, run, catch, or tackle isn't going to do very well. And same thing for our nonprofit boards. We want different leadership styles. We want different communication styles, different relationships with conflict. If we had an entire board that, leaned headlong into conflict, that's not a group I want to be a part of. Same thing if we had an entire board that was conflict averse. We want that diversity of talent, skills, styles, and experiences.
And what are the most effective methods for conducting board assessments?
There's really two different styles or two different approaches. For a small nonprofit organization that is resource constrained, that has limited time, limited resources, a lot of times a simple survey of the board, and you can design that electronically and send it out to the board, is a quick, efficient way to gather data and information and spur conversation. The magic of board assessments is not in someone sitting down and filling out a survey. The magic is in the discussion that comes from the results as the board wrestles with it and says, okay, it looks like we're struggling over here. What are the 1, 2, or 3 things that we could do that would move us forward? So that's one way of board assessment. If an organization is larger, more complex, has a larger budget, then you can look at doing things like one-on-one interviews with board members or action planning with individual board members. But even with that, you'd want to make sure you include the management team so that you're getting a well-rounded perspective of the board. Either approach can be effective. Either approach can yield strong results.
And if we took nonprofits in 3 different stages of 3 different buckets, $0 to $100,000 in donations, 100 to 500, and 500 to $1 million plus. In those 3, does it are there a good board size for each level of your nonprofit as it grows? And as it gets over the $1 million mark, what should the board, the number of board members be? What is kind of your advice on that as they're growing?
So I'll give you my bias at the outset, Tom. I am a minimalist by nature, having been a nonprofit CEO for over a decade. I always preferred to work with a smaller team of board members rather than a larger team, particularly at the outset. And I do some work with founding nonprofits and nonprofit formation. I like to keep a small group of 4 to 6 board members at the outset, just because there's so many decisions coming down the pike, and it's so important for the board to be nimble and agile and flexible and all those fun words that we share. As the board and organization grows and matures, we know from the data that the average nonprofit board size is 12. When you get to some of the larger folks, the over $1 million plus, that's when board sizes tend to expand and you start to see the 15 to 20 to 25. More than that, it becomes really difficult and really a time drain on the executive director and the board leadership as well.
Yeah, I can imagine, because the more opinions you have, the more kind of infighting there might be, and it just would take longer to get everything done, right?
One of the misconceptions that's out there is that someone has to be a board member in order to make an impact on the organization. I talk to so many nonprofit CEOs, and we're going through their board roster, their board members, and their contributions, and you ask, why is so and so a member of the board? Well, they make a donation annually, and I don't want to lose them. Someone doesn't have to be a board member in order to be a donor. They don't have to be a board member to be a committee member or to volunteer for the organization. There's lots of different ways to serve. So I always encourage nonprofit leaders to keep a broad, open mind as it relates to volunteer opportunities for your organization. The board is obviously one big, really important volunteer opportunity, but it's part of a menu of options.
I was on stage recently doing a talk for nonprofit founders, and one of the questions came up kind of on a side conversation, and this individual was telling me how they bring on board members that are high value donors. What's your thought on bringing in, people that donate a large sum of money to your organizations and inviting them in to be a board member? Do you think that's a good idea, not a good idea? I don't really know, because there's so many different ways that you can think about it. I'd love to get your perspective on it.
I'm not in any way opposed to a high net worth donor to the organization serving on a board, as long as that's not the only reason they're serving on the board. Sometimes you hear from nonprofit leaders and founders that someone is serving on the board simply because they make a large donation to the organization. Well, what else do they bring to the board team? Their skills or their talents? Are they showing up for board meetings? Do they have the time to serve on the board? There are other cons that come along with having a major donor to the organization sitting on the board. First of all, they see the warts. They're looking under the hood as board members, and there are certain things in certain parts of our organizations that we don't necessarily want to broadcast to our highest value donor to the organization. There's also the risk of undue influence. You have a team of board members, and if there's one person sitting around the table whose influence is perceived to be significantly greater than any other board member, it can have a chilling effect on the conversation and the discussion around the board table. So not that it's a bad idea, not that it's a negative or not a good practice, but these are considerations and discussions I'd want to have with that donor prior to them joining the board? How are we going to navigate that together? And how are we going to make sure that the board can still function effectively as a team?
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that. When you're helping nonprofits kind of assess different board members or giving them advice, what are some character traits that might be something to look for in, kind of that board member recruiting process?
So it starts with me with time. Is this an individual? Sometimes you hear from nonprofits, if only I could get Oprah Winfrey or Bill Gates or someone to serve on the board, all my problems would go away. The reality is board members need time in order to be an effective member of the team. Can they show up to meetings? Can they serve on a committee? Are they going to be there as a thought partner when the CEO needs to reach them? Or is it going to take 3 weeks for them to respond to an email or a phone call? Then it goes to what skills, talents, or attributes do they bring that we don't already have on the board team? Is it marketing? Is it legal skill? Is it financial acumen? What is it that they bring that we need as part of our team? And then I look to the 3 Ds, doers, donors, and door openers. We want board members who are going to be doers, who are going to show up, who are going to help us do things and advance the mission. That's why they exist. Donors, we want board members who believe in and passionately are willing to support the mission. And then door openers. One of the most important roles of a board member is to be an ambassador for the mission. Are you willing to talk about our mission, our impact, and look within your own network of who might our mission resonate with?
I love that. The 3 Ds, the doers, the donors, and the door openers.
Yeah.
That's a great one to have there. When it comes to kind of the strategic plan that the board is kind of putting together, what are some essential elements that should be included in that strategic plan?
Landscape assessment. It is typically the area that board members want to skip when it comes to strategic planning. I do a lot of strategic planning with boards, and they are super excited to get into the planning phase. They want to set goals and metrics and strategies. What they are not as excited about is assessing, where are we now? What is it that we do really, really well right now? What is it that we're really struggling with? What are our opportunities? What does the landscape around us look like with or other organizations that we can either collaborate with, compete with, or partner with? That landscape assessment gives rise to the potential goals and opportunities for the organization. If we skip that landscape assessment piece, the board is really flying blind in setting goals.
I can imagine a lot of people that start a nonprofit, they have a sensitive side of them, right? And saying no to people that want to join the board could be a hard thing to do. What are some easy ways for those people that just don't like to tell people, no, I'm sorry, but our board is full, or you wouldn't be the right fit, even if it is somebody that maybe they know personally that wants to be involved, but they know in their heart that they're not a good fit? Is there an easy way to kind of maybe let somebody down that we can give some tips to some of our listeners?
Yeah, I think it starts with having a process. There are too many executive directors, nonprofit CEOs that take board recruiting on their own shoulders as though they are solely responsible for that. Having a process in place, the board is its own leader of the team. The CEO can be part of that, or the executive director can be part of that, but it's important to have a recruiting process that is not controlled and in the hands of one person. So for an executive director who has a hard time saying no, having a specific vetting process that their board goes through is a way to massage that in a way that the decision is not entirely on one person's shoulders, but we're assessing regularly the skills, the talents, the attributes that we need on the team. And then it goes back to having that menu of other options. If I have a hard time saying no to someone as a board member, it's a little bit easier if I can say, you know what, you may not be the best fit for the board, but we have these committee positions open. We have these volunteer positions open. We have an advisory group or a task force that we're forming to help us. There are other options and ways of serving.
Mm. Yeah, that's great, because I always there's so many founders that I talk to that they just want to do everything, and they take everything on their own shoulders, and it's better to kind of maybe delegate some of those tasks out. especially if you want to grow and scale, right? Like our goal here is to always get you over the $1 million donations a year mark. And you can't do it by yourself. There are a lot of nonprofits I do talk to that can get over that. I'm doing it all on their own, but it's a full-time job for them. They're working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And the burnout rate might be a little bit high. But if you really want to grow and scale and kind of keep your sanity, being able to delegate some of those tasks and really just find out what you're good at, what you're not good at. And then, there's always somebody that's going to be good at saying no to people. Find that person and put them in charge.
You're absolutely right. And it's one of the realities of being a nonprofit executive is that there are a lot of ideas shared with you and presented to you, and it can be hard to say no. One of the things I talk to nonprofit leaders about all the time is, do you have a scorecard in your organization of key criteria that allows you to say, yes, this is a program or a service that is valuable, or no, this is just not right for us at this point in time. If not, a lot of those ideas sound great. When you're sitting in that executive director chair and someone comes in and says, I have a great new program or service or way for us to address homelessness in the community, gosh, it's hard to say no to that if I don't have a set of criteria or benchmarks of how do I evaluate this program versus that, because we can't do both.
Yeah. What are some signs of an effective or an ineffective board? How can you tell the difference if you have one or the other going on right now?
Expectations, support, and accountability. Those are the three key things that I look for. Has this board set specific expectations for board members such that everyone around the table is clear what it means to be a member of this particular board? The second is, do they provide support for board members? If I have questions, if I have challenges, if I need additional support to meet those expectations, is that available to me as a board member? And then the third piece of the puzzle is accountability. One of my favorite questions to ask nonprofit board chairs specifically is, what is your culture of accountability at the board level? Do board members follow through on the commitments that they make? If they don't, what does that look like? Who handles that? Who has those difficult conversations? So the three things that I look for most are expectations, support, and accountability.
And like the common misconceptions of only assessing the board when something negative happens versus basically making a routine to kind of just a normal cadence, kind of talk about that and kind of the importance of that regular assessment and cadence to kind of get ahead of things.
When we don't have a regular cadence with board assessment and an organization or a leader tries to introduce it to the board, the immediate reaction from board members is one of kind of skepticism, or they feel criticized, or they feel like they're put on the spot. Are we doing this because I've done something wrong? Or do you think we're not a good board, or I'm not a good board member? When it's part of the regular cadence, it becomes part of the board's goal setting. Right? So I always worry when I talk to boards and I ask them, what are your priorities for 2025? And I hear, well, we want to be a better board, or we want to do more, or we want to be better at governance. I don't know what that means, and neither do they, right? Yeah. That doesn't roll up into anything tangible. The value of a board assessment at regular intervals is it allows the board to set priorities. We are struggling as a board with fundraising. So as a result, our 2025 goals are going to be, we're going to provide additional training for the board, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. We're struggling with putting together and reporting on our financial statements. That allows us to set specific and tangible goals that are beyond just, we want to be a better board, because I don't know what that means, and neither do they.
Yeah, I mean, there's no vision to that, right? It's just generic words, because they really don't have a plan to plan with the board, yes. Right? And I think that's also, kind of
quite frankly, gives voice to what they're probably feeling and experiencing anyway. So I very rarely will lead a board assessment and have a board look at the data and results and go, boy, I didn't know where that came from. I thought we were knocking it out of the park in strategic planning, and this says that we're not. That doesn't really happen. What happens more often is it affirms what most board members internally are feeling and thinking anyway, but may not have voiced publicly yet.
Mhm. And you work with a lot of nonprofits and you do this exact thing. So what are some other things that when you come into a nonprofit and you lead that first meeting or you assess the first board meeting, what is it that you're bringing to the table that you're helping them with?
Facilitation. It is an outside voice. It's a neutral third party. I don't know the organization nearly as well as they do, and that's the value, right? Sometimes we see a board chair wants to lead this process, or the executive director wants to lead this process, and what happens as a result of that is their participation gets lost. They're spending so much time and effort trying to be the facilitator and making sure everyone's voice is heard that we lose the value of their contributions and their thoughts and their ideas. So the benefit of having an external third party conduct the assessment, lead, and facilitate the discussion is I don't have a preferred side. There's no one who is going to win and no one who is going to lose. I don't have a preferred solution or set of priorities for their organization. My job is to ask the tough questions, bring out the elephants in the room, and then facilitate difficult conversations that allow them to get to a place that they're comfortable with their priorities.
And bringing in a third party facilitator like yourself, like how often should that happen? Is it quarterly, biannually, annually, every couple of years? When do they normally bring you in and how often?
So I would say typically it's annually when we're doing board assessment, is that most organizations are on a cadence where they're going to assess the board in some way annually. And then we'll come in and do a facilitated discussion of the results. Some organizations want some follow up. So they say, you know what, you came in, we had a great discussion of the board assessment, we set priorities. Can you come back 6 months from now and just do a check in with us and facilitate a conversation where we said we were going to do X, Y, and Z. Now hold our feet to the fire. Did we do it? Where did we succeed? And we want to celebrate. Where did we run into some obstacles? And how are we going to navigate our way around those?
And when a board brings you in, is there anything that they could be doing? Let's just say they're going to bring you in at the end of the year. What can they be doing for the 6 to 8 months before that, before you come in, so that you have just a meeting that just kicks butt and you get the most productivity out of it, and you can basically go into the next year firing on all cylinders?
Make sure that board members are clear on expectations and their roles. When we have to start from ground zero of explaining to a board, this is the role of a board member, these are your fiduciary duties, we're losing a lot of time, right? Not that that information is not valuable. It's critically important and it's critically valuable, but it doesn't allow us to get to the next step, which is how do we take this organization from point A to point B?
And I would assume that as you're weeding that out months in advance of the final or of the assessment, that will also probably weed out some board members that maybe aren't aligned.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be doing that when you're bringing in and paying for a third party to come in there and wasting time. You really want to get in there, get the most basically results so that you can leave that meeting with action steps. You don't want to be having internal fighting or internal conflicts, trying to figure out whose role is what. That should all be done ahead of time before bringing in an expert to kind of come in and facilitate an assessment. Because I could see the value in just leaving that meeting with a clear path and framework to just kind of go into the next year and just kind of hit all of the goals that were set.
I think that speaks for all of us that we want to be surrounded by strong fellow leaders. We don't want someone who has skipped the last 5 board meetings suddenly showing up for the discussion around setting priorities for the coming year. Not that they can't make a contribution, but we don't know how well informed that contribution is going to be. So there is value in circling the wagons and saying, this is our team. This is our core group of board members moving forward. This is the group that we want sitting around the table making difficult decisions about what our priorities are going to be.
Well, Gregory, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for being here and giving us your insight on board assessments, which is one of those things that you might not be thinking about. You might have regular board meetings, but actually sitting down and assessing everybody's responsibilities and are they showing up and are they contributing the way that they should be to align with the goals of the future of the organization And bringing in a third party to help facilitate that, I think, is an amazing idea. How can people find out more information about what you do and what you can do to help them if they want to bring in a third party, someone like you, to facilitate their next board meeting?
Thanks, Tom, and I appreciate this platform and all that you're doing through the podcast as well. Folks can reach out to me directly on my website, which is Nielsen Consults.
Awesome. Well, Gregory, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for being here and being part of the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. If you'd like free resources to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark, visit realtomkelly.com/playbooks. And because I'm committed to helping nonprofits maximize their impact and reach as many people as possible, contact us at hello@realtomkelly.com to explore bringing me in to speak at your next event. And as always, I'm looking forward to sharing more transformative insights with you on our next episode.